throwaway for obvious reasons. I'd been lurking here for years, usually reading other people's train wrecks and thinking, damn, I'd never let that happen to me. Well, here we are. I'm 34M, married to my wife, 31F, for almost 5 years. Things were fine. Stable. That's the word she liked to use, stable. We had jobs, a condo, a standing Sunday dinner with her parents, and the kind of shared Amazon account where you could tell what mood she was in by what was in the cart. But then came the dinner. 2, actually. Let me just say, if anyone ever tells you that edibles hit differently when you're nervous, believe them. I had taken a tiny gummy before dinner with her parents to take the edge off. Tiny. Just wanted to be chill. But this gummy must have been forged in Mordor, because by the time we sat down at the restaurant, the steak knife looked like a tiny Excalibur and the waiter's eyebrows were doing the Macarena. That dinner, well, I'll get to that. Then, not even 2 weeks later, I found myself at another dinner, this time with her boss. And somehow, I ended up trying to throw a steak out the window of a 5-star downtown restaurant because I was convinced the meat was looking at me with judgment. Yeah. 2 dinners. 1 unraveling marriage. And a man who now has a very complicated relationship with THC and beef. This isn't just a story about getting too high. This is a story about what happens when people stop saying what they feel and start letting dinner parties become battlegrounds. There were signs. My gut told me. But I was too busy pretending everything was fine. So, buckle up. Because it gets weirder and sadder and maybe even a little funny if it didn't happen to you. So, picture this, I'm sitting in the car outside a rustic Italian place where her parents always want to go. You know the type, linen tablecloths, oil and vinegar setups already on the table, and a menu that hasn't changed since 1998. I pop what I thought was a 5 milligrams edible. Microdose. No big deal. I'd had it before. But this one was a little darker in color and tasted slightly piney. By the time we walked through the doors, I knew I was in trouble. The hostess asked how many were in our party and I blurted out, 7, no wait, 4. There are 4 of us. I was thinking spiritually. My wife side-eyed me so hard I felt my skin peel off. Her dad's face turned into a question mark. Her mom, bless her, just assumed I was trying to be deep. We sat down, and that's when the floor started breathing. I tried to play it cool, but my mouth was dry as sawdust and I was hyper-aware of my jaw movements. I became obsessed with how loudly I was chewing the bread. Every bite sounded like thunder. Then I started laughing. At what? The curtains. They had these stupid tasseled curtains that looked like someone had skinned a Victorian couch and stapled it to the wall. It hit me just right, and I let out this little snort laugh. Like a piglet. In silence. Mid-salad. Everyone looked at me like I farted in church. My wife kicked me under the table, hard. I tried to recover by saying something about the absurdity of decor in the face of modern economics, which made exactly 0 sense and only made me sound more high. But here's where it went from awkward to ominous. Her dad leaned forward and asked, "Are you all right, son?" And I swear to God, I thought he said, "Are you a knight, son?" So I just nodded solemnly and said, "In many ways, yes." The silence after that felt like someone had vacuum sealed the table. Now, I'm not sure exactly when the edible reached full throttle, but I do know it coincided with the waiter offering freshly grated Parmesan. He leans in, smiling, asking if I want cheese. And I, like a person who hasn't been publicly humiliated yet, say, "Sure." But as he's grating, it suddenly feels intimate. Like weirdly sensual. The kind of eye contact you don't make unless you're slow dancing or engaged in a hostage negotiation. He keeps grating. I panic. I whisper, "That's enough." He keeps grating. I say, louder this time, "That's enough cheese." He doesn't stop. I hear my voice, shaky, high-pitched, say, "Please." The cheese is too powerful. My wife's fork clinks against her plate. Her mom gasps. Her dad just stares at me like I told him I don't believe in tires. The waiter slowly backs away like I'm the weird raccoon in their alley they don't want to spook. That's when I realize I'm sweating. Not normal sweating, glistening. I can feel the fabric of my shirt fusing with my spine. My wife leans in and hisses through her teeth. "What the hell is wrong with you?" And here's the moment I felt something shift. Not just the edible. Her tone. It wasn't concern. It wasn't confusion. It was cold. Like I had embarrassed her before and this was just confirmation bias. And maybe it was. Maybe I'd been trying too hard to seem normal at these family dinners, and the cracks were finally showing. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. Her mom asked a simple question. "So, how's work?" I opened my mouth. I really did. I had a perfectly normal answer about Q1 projections and hybrid scheduling. But what came out was, work is a complicated lie we tell ourselves to avoid dying alone. I smiled. No one else did. At that point, I knew I had two options: excuse myself and try to write it out in the bathroom, or double down and pretend this was all performance art. Unfortunately, the edible had taken full control of the ship, and I was just a wide-eyed passenger strapped to the hull. So, I reached for a breadstick. Something familiar. Something grounding. It snapped in my hand like a twig and I started laughing again, quietly, but helplessly. My wife grabbed my forearm so tight I felt her wedding ring dig into my skin. "You're ruining this," she whispered. "This?" I whispered back. "This night. This dinner. This family." That hit harder than I expected. I blinked at her. Her parents were staring, forks frozen midair. Even the waiter had stopped by the next table and was sneak-glancing, like he didn't want to miss the drama. It was a lot for a Wednesday. I tried to apologize. I really did. But all that came out was, "I think I made a mistake." And the way I said it, it didn't sound like I meant the edible. Her father cleared his throat. "So, about that loan." "Wait. What?" Turns out this whole dinner wasn't just a meal. It was a setup. They wanted to talk business. Her parents had been helping us with a down payment, and apparently strings were attached, something about converting their garage into a guest suite so they could visit more often. My wife knew. She definitely knew. She just hadn't told me. I was ambushed. High, sweaty, emotionally raw, and now suddenly in a financial hostage negotiation while holding a broken breadstick like a stress toy. That betrayal hit me in the gut harder than any edible ever could. I looked at her. She didn't look back. Just sipped her wine, like she wasn't watching me drown. I think that's the moment something snapped inside me. Not in a dramatic way, no table flipping or shouting. Just the slow, sinking realization: I am not part of this plan. I'm the guy being managed. I excused myself to the bathroom, mostly so I wouldn't cry at the table. Because yes, I was about to cry. Don't judge me. Between the edible and the ambush, my brain was soup. I stared at myself in the mirror for a full 5 minutes, shirt stuck to my back, eyes like dinner plates, whispering. Be normal. Be normal. Stop thinking about cows. Why cows? Because I suddenly remembered that steak was coming. A steak I didn't order. A steak I couldn't emotionally process. I was already having a moral breakdown about Parmesan. How was I supposed to handle animal muscle on a plate? Back at the table, the steak arrives. Big, juicy, medium rare, probably $40 worth of shame staring me in the face. I couldn't eat it. I couldn't look at it. I wanted to eat it straight out the window, but I couldn't locate the window. Everything looked like fake scenery on a sitcom set. Too glossy. Too staged. My wife leaned over and muttered, "Please don't be weird." Too late. Because what did I do? I picked up the steak with my fork and said, "Dead serious, he looks like a Carl." I can't eat Carl. Then I tried to gently place the steak back on the plate like I was tucking it into bed. Her boss, who had joined late and sat at the end of the table like some kind of neutral Switzerland, just raised his eyebrows and said, "So, this is the husband I've heard about." And that's when I realized, this wasn't just about alone. Or family. This was political. My wife had brought me here not just to impress her parents, but to display me. To sell me to her boss. I was a prop in some corporate-adjacent dinner theater production, and I had just wandered on stage in a clown nose and Crocs. And she wasn't defending me. Not once. Not even with a fake laugh. That hurt. More than I expected. So there I was, holding back tears, fork still hovering over Carl the steak like I was deciding whether to baptize him or bury him. And my wife? She was chatting with her boss now, full corporate mode. Laughing a little too hard at his jokes, nudging his arm when he said something edgy, talking about how hard we've both been working on the renovations. That we hit like a hammer. Because I was the one who painted the goddamn kitchen. I was the one who stayed up until 2 a.m. fixing the cabinets when she ordered the wrong hinges off Etsy. I was the one who said, "Let's save money and do it ourselves." And now she was crediting herself in front of her boss like I was just a stone mascot for our marriage. And he ate it up. Asked her questions about fixtures. Colors. Where she got her design inspiration. Didn't look at me once. I tried to jump in, said something about the insulation issues we ran into, tried to explain how I had to reroute a vent behind the drywall, and my wife cut me off mid-sentence. "Anyway," she said, "he's really good with tools, but I have the vision." It was casual. Quick. A harmless little jab. But it told me everything. I wasn't her partner in this life. I was the help. And sitting there, high, exposed, humiliated, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe before: she was embarrassed by me. Not just tonight. Not just because of the edible. In general. She was embarrassed of me. And the worst part? She had every right to be. Because I'd let her reshape me into this version of myself, harmless, docile, performative. A guy who throws out steaks instead of throwing down boundaries. So I did what any man in my position would do. I excused myself to the bathroom. Again. Only this time, I didn't come back right away. I walked outside, lit a cigarette, even though I hadn't smoked in years, and stared at the parking lot lights until they stopped looking like halos. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just a bad dinner. This was a goodbye forming in silence. Out there in the cool night air, something settled in me. Like the edible had finally passed through some final boss level of my brain and left behind only silence. Not peace. Not yet. But silence. I watched couples walk in and out of the restaurant. Some holding hands. Some fighting quietly in that tight-lipped, teeth-clenched way only long-term couples do. I wondered which one we looked like inside. And I hated that I didn't even know. I checked my phone. No text from her. No, "Are you okay?" Not even a "Where are you?" It had been 15 minutes. That's when I started running the math in my head. How many dinners like this had there been? How many times had I bit my tongue while she made jokes at my expense? How often did she use that tone with me in front of people, smooth, dismissive, like she was just managing the damage? I had always chalked it up to stress. Or being the funny couple. Or just how things were in public. But now I saw it for what it was: disrespect, polished up with a napkin and served medium rare. And I started thinking about who I used to be. Before all this. Before the house. Before the loans that weren't really gifts. Before I started editing myself to make her life smoother. Back then, I used to have opinions. I used to get excited about things. I used to laugh with people, not as a defense mechanism. And that night, in the glow of the Applebee's parking lot, yes, it was Applebee's, which somehow makes it worse, I made a pact with myself. No more quiet humiliation. If this relationship required me to shrink, to apologize for existing in the wrong tone or with the wrong facial expression, it wasn't a partnership. It was a performance. And I was done performing. I walked back in. Calm. Sobered, not from the edible, but from the sharp, bracing reality of what my marriage had become. When I got back to the table, the steak Carl was still there. Cold now. Sad. Like a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Her parents had left already. Apparently, they'd had an early morning. My wife barely looked up. "You disappeared," she said. I sat down. I didn't touch Carl. I didn't say sorry. Instead, I said, "Did you tell me we were pitching a guest suite tonight?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" I looked her dead in the eye. "You brought me here to sign off on something I didn't know about. You let your dad drop a financial bomb on me like it was casual dinner talk. And now your boss is here, who you also didn't mention, and I'm the clown at the table?" She looked shocked. Like a school principal had just been told off by the janitor. "Why are you making this a thing?" she said. That's when I smiled. Not a nice smile. The kind of smile you give when you've seen all the way through someone and the curtains finally dropped. Then, impulsively, dramatically, maybe stupidly, I picked up Carl, the steak, and walked into the nearest window. There was a window, by the way. I just hadn't seen it through the edible fog earlier. And with more ceremony than I care to admit, I opened it and gently tossed Carl into the bushes. There was a pause. A weird, silent beat of nothing. Her boss let out a slow, amused exhale. "Well," he said, "that's certainly one way to make a statement." I turned to her. "I'm not staying for dessert." Then I left. Not in a huff. Not storming out. Just walked. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like I was walking toward something. I didn't go far. Just sat in the car with the engine off, letting the quiet buzz of the parking lot and the hum of my own heartbeat fill the space. It wasn't the edible anymore that was mostly gone. What was left was me, raw and blinking, like I'd just emerged from some long, underwater silence. About 10 minutes later, she came out. She didn't get in right away. Just stood by the passenger door, staring at me like I was the crazy one. Like I'd just embarrassed her. "You threw the steak out the window," she said flatly. I nodded. "Yeah. Because I couldn't throw out the last 6 years." She finally got in, slamming the door harder than necessary. The ride home was silent except for her occasional passive-aggressive sighs. You know the kind. The ones that are meant to be a conversation starter without actually starting a conversation. I wasn't playing that game anymore. Halfway home, she snapped. "You always do this. You ruin things when you feel left out. Instead of stepping up, you melt down." I stared straight ahead. "You don't want a partner. You want a background actor who doesn't eat too many edibles and doesn't say weird things at dinner." "That's not fair," she snapped. "You embarrassed me in front of my boss. In front of my parents. And you humiliated me on purpose," I said. "You used me as a joke, a prop, and a strategy all in one night." No response. Just the sound of her jaw clenching, and the clicking of her nails against her phone screen as she scrolled through whatever version of reality made her feel like the sane one. I wasn't mad anymore. I was grieving. Grieving the version of our relationship where I thought we were equals. Grieving the guy I used to be before I learned to make myself small just to keep the peace. We got home and she went straight upstairs. No words. No eye contact. Just the sound of heels on hardwood and a bedroom door closing like a final verdict. I stayed downstairs, sitting at the kitchen island under that weird warm light that makes everything look more dramatic than it is. Or maybe everything just was that dramatic. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was thick. It was the kind of silence you only get after someone says something that can't be unsaid. I opened the fridge out of habit. Closed it again. Wandered the house like a ghost looking for the version of himself that used to live there. Touched the edges of the new backsplash we'd installed together. Ran a hand over the dent in the wall we never got around to patching. She called this house a we project. But it wasn't. It was her stage. And I had just refused my cue. Eventually, I sat down and typed out a note. Not a letter. Not a breakup speech. Just a brain dump. Things like, when did I become someone you edited in public? Why do you call it overreacting when I finally tell you how I feel? Do you actually respect me, or do you just like having someone who won't challenge you? I didn't send it. Just stared at the cursor blinking at the end like it was daring me to press send. That night, I slept on the couch. Not because she told me to, but because I couldn't lay next to someone who treated my vulnerability like a liability. It was one of the loneliest nights of my life. And weirdly, one of the clearest. Because for once, I didn't twist myself into a version of me that made her more comfortable. I just sat with the version that hurt and let him feel it. The morning came like it always does, awkwardly, with the sun spilling in through the blinds, lighting up the half-empty coffee mugs and the leftover dishes from last night's dinner. I could hear her moving around upstairs, a faint sound of her getting ready for work. But there was no rush. No frantic morning chaos. Just the kind of quiet that hangs heavy when things have already been said without words. She came downstairs, looking like she'd been up for hours. No apology. No mention of last night. She was on autopilot. I'm leaving in 20, she said. You need anything before I go? I looked up from the kitchen island. I wasn't even really sure what I needed. I felt like I'd already lost everything that mattered in the last 12 hours. No. I'm good, I replied. Thanks for asking. She paused, like she expected something more. Like she wanted me to give her a way out of this awkwardness. To pretend the steak incident was just some weird fluke. But I couldn't play along anymore. I couldn't shrink myself into that passive role she needed me to fill. All right, she said, as if she had already decided on the next chapter of this story without me. I'll be home late. And then, like a character exiting a scene with no emotional stakes, she left. I sat there for a while, staring at the cold coffee cup in front of me. Everything felt like it had shifted, but I wasn't sure where I stood. I thought back to the note I had written last night. The one that never got sent. The one that still sat on my phone, unfinished. There was something cathartic about it. Something raw, but honest. I didn't have the energy for an all-out confrontation. Not yet. But that didn't mean I was going to pretend everything was fine. By the time she came home that night, I had already made my decision. I had no real plan for what would come next. No speech. No dramatics. Just a quiet, deliberate choice to stop pretending. She walked in, her heels clicking on the tile as she tossed her purse on the couch. I didn't turn around, just kept folding the laundry like I was doing something mindless, like I hadn't just spent the entire day reflecting on every moment of the last few years. She didn't speak at first. Just stood there, watching me. Then, out of nowhere, she dropped her work bag on the counter and said, "Can we talk?" I felt a knot in my stomach. I knew what she wanted. She wanted to fix it. Or at least pretend to. But I wasn't in the mood for fixing anymore. I wasn't in the mood to be a project. I stood up, dusted off my hands, and turned to face her. "I'm done," I said quietly. She blinked. "What?" "Done with what?" "Done with pretending that this is what I want. Done with us being some version of a relationship that doesn't make sense. Done with waiting around for you to see me as more than just a convenience." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Like she didn't know what to say. But I could see the wheels turning, her trying to come up with something that would shift the conversation back into familiar territory. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice already shifting into that tone I'd grown so familiar with. The one that dismissed everything I felt. "No," I said, holding up my phone, showing her the unfinished note. The one I had written last night. "I'm done not saying what I feel." She stared at the screen for a moment. Then, slowly, she took a step back. Not a step toward resolution, but away. You don't get it, do you? She asked, her voice tinged with frustration. This was never about me disrespecting you. Then what was it about? I asked. I was genuinely curious now. Was it work? Was it family? Was it just easier for her to keep me on the sidelines of her life? But she didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked upstairs without another word. And just like that, I realized this wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even a fight. It was an end. The rest of the evening passed in that weird, thick silence. We were both in the house, but it was as if we weren't. I stayed in the living room, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, pretending I didn't notice the occasional creak of floorboards above me. I wasn't going up there. I wasn't going to beg for her to come down and fix things, because I realized something essential. She wouldn't. Not because she couldn't. But because she didn't want to. The truth was, I had been so desperate to keep things together. I'd been trying to make everything work, make it smooth, make it okay. But it wasn't about fixing her or even fixing us. It was about me finally admitting I couldn't keep pretending to be the guy who fit into the gaps of her life anymore. By the time she came down from the bedroom, it was close to midnight. She'd showered, changed into something more comfortable, but there was no "I'm sorry" in her eyes. No admission of anything. Just a quiet acceptance of the strange new dynamic between us. "You're not leaving, are you?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the couch, her voice strangely soft. "No," I said. "But I'm not staying, either." That's when it hit me, the final truth. There was no more pretending. There was no together but separate or let's work on it. We had already worked through all that, and it was clear now, this was the moment of reckoning. Her eyes darted away from mine. "I'm sorry if I hurt you," she said quietly. "But I don't think we're in the same place anymore." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. The finality of it all hung between us like smoke. She left the room again, heading back to the bedroom. I stayed in the living room, feeling the weight of 1,000 small decisions that led us here. There was no explosion, no grand confrontation, just a quiet, inevitable realization that we had both been drifting, and we'd finally run out of things to say. The next few days were a blur of routine. The kind of routine that makes you feel like you're walking through a fog, like you're going through the motions, but you're not really there. She barely spoke to me. And when she did, it was more transactional than anything else. I was living in this weird limbo. We still shared the same space, but I knew things were over. There was no point in pretending otherwise. I started taking longer walks, driving around aimlessly, just to avoid the house. Anything to avoid this suffocating atmosphere. She was still here, but I wasn't really here anymore. I won't lie, I felt relief. Not because I wanted the relationship to end, but because I'd finally stopped trying to fix something that wasn't ever going to be fixed. The truth was, I had outgrown the man I had been in that relationship. And, maybe, so had she. We were both stuck in roles we didn't fit into anymore. Me as the guy who would just take it, and her as the person who expected me to always be okay, no matter what. I think I finally started grieving the version of me that had been playing that role. The guy who didn't speak up, who swallowed everything just to keep the peace. It wasn't about the steak. It wasn't even about the edibles. It was about the realization that for too long, I had been a background character in my own life. I was tired of that guy. A few weeks passed. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was about the logistics. The things that were unavoidable: who was getting the car, who was going to handle the bills. Nothing personal, nothing emotional. Just the aftermath. I won't say I was fully healed. It's a weird thing, moving on from a relationship like that. It's not about some grand moment of clarity or an epiphany that everything will be okay. It's a slow process, like a wound finally starting to close, but you're not sure if you can ever touch it without feeling pain. But something had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just accepting. Accepting that I couldn't change her, and I couldn't change what had happened between us. The only thing I could control was what came next. And that was the thing that I needed to figure out. I started focusing more on myself. Rediscovering things I used to love but had abandoned. I signed up for a painting class, went on runs that didn't involve avoiding her, spent time with friends who didn't expect me to be someone I wasn't. I learned to live without waiting for someone else to validate my feelings. I realized how important it is to speak up when something isn't right. That pretending everything is fine for the sake of someone else's comfort is a slow death for your own happiness. If I could give anyone advice, it would be this: don't wait for a big, dramatic moment to make a change. Don't wait for the perfect opportunity to leave or to stand up for yourself. Change happens when you start being honest with yourself about what you really want and what you're willing to tolerate. And sometimes, leaving isn't about escaping the person. It's about saving the person you used to be.